Rob, I'd like for you to frame a little bit for the audience. What do you think they're actually going to see possible in the next 12 to 18 months? You know, we talk about, oh my gosh, the pace of change. What's that actually going to look like on the ground?
Well, thank you for the kind invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all. I think that my perspective is I come from the national security apparatus, if you will, so I have that bias built in, and so my apologies in advance. But I think that there's one thing that came up last night in our conversation that really struck me, and it was a combination of what both of you said. It was the idea that one thing that we can control is our own cognitive readiness, that we can control where we are in terms of our learning curve, where we are in terms of our knowledge and our capabilities. We can't control where the tech is. And to be honest, the technologists can't really control that either. To Ryan's point last night, large language models and generative AI were mostly the result of Forrest Gumping our way through technology. It really wasn't a plan. If you were going to look at where, say, the government was making big bets on AI, it would never have been Transformers. We weren't putting money into Transformers. And that's the technology that took off and created these lifelike bots. We didn't predict that. It just occurred. So given that that's sort of the state of pace, the way to manage that is to manage what we're learning, our experiences, and our interaction with that technology. I have no idea if I answered your question, but it felt like a pretty good riff, right? So
I think you gave us a really good way to frame it. And I would like to underscore there is an element that we can control to a degree, which is our learning, where we go for information, how we engage with others to have that conversation. And then there's always, we are approaching deep seek conversation time up here. There is always going to be that element of, oh wow, something pigeons in out of the sky, right? Ryan, you mentioned something last night as well that I'd love the audience to hear your thoughts on, which is how you see the long tail of the impact to a lot of companies' value props and their mission of this.
So if we're talking about generative AI in particular, the most important thing to understand is why is this so powerful? What's the atomic unit of change here? And in a nutshell, we've never had technology that can create before. It's never happened. It's all been about automation and operationalization and analytics and those kinds of things. So this is a fundamentally new data capability that has simply never existed before. So if you have a little bit of whiplash from the speed of it, it's because this is actually part of what the technology does. It accelerates, it creates, and we've just never had to manage anything like it before, as Rob said. By the way, I don't think you're that scary, but
thank you.
But it's just it's entirely new. And so with that said, if we look historically at what's happened with some of the previous big wave technology changes, we've seen, for example, marginal cost of distribution in terms of content and software and those kinds of things go down to zero. We've seen marginal cost of compute go down to zero. And so the big question is, what might the marginal cost implications of something like Gen AI become? And the most logical way to frame it is we expect the marginal cost of innovation to go down to zero. Right? Great response. That's exactly it. And so how do we work that in? Right? How do we work that in over time? And by the way, keep in mind we're at day one of a 10-year journey. But looking at the economics of how these major platform shifts occur is actually really instructive. We already know, and there was a piece of research done by S&P looking at companies that were investing at a transformational level in AI between 2022 and 23. And they were already seeing approximately 90% productivity advantages over their competitors across basically every functional area in the enterprise. Wow. And that's with off-the-shelf tech. By the way, that's exactly the kind of stuff that we saw with other technology waves. So again, there's patterns that we can recognize. But the thing that's different is this idea of innovation, business model evolution, new value propositions. That's always where winners and losers start to shake out. Everybody sort of figures their way to the automation and the productivity over time. That's obvious. The trick is, how do we actually turn this into new value creation? And that's, I think, the big strategic challenge that organizations have.
And I'm guessing, Ryan, we've got a mix of companies and verticals out here in the audience. I'm going to make the guess that some of these companies, they have a huge opportunity in front to invest more in innovation and reap those benefits. There's probably also a fair amount of companies represented here today that are going to have significant possible loss on the horizon if they're not thinking about how this shrinking in the margins is going to actually affect what they do and how they make money.
So I think as directors, one of the things that's always very useful is to put this technology discussion into economic and financial performance terms, because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? And so understanding the impacts, framing it that way gets everybody on the same page, and we can talk about not necessarily technology developments, which can be sort of all over the place, but we can talk about the economic impact of these changes. Again, it's been the case historically, depending on the sector, depending on the tech, that there have been margin pressures that naturally come in by virtue of the different compute that's sort of the order of the day. The thing that's different about this Gen AI wave is that it's every functional area, every industry, very, very quickly. And it's also tricky because we have to get our heads around the fact that we can do things we've never been able to do before. So as executives and board directors, if we're only focused on productivity, if we're only focused on sort of enhancing the current operations, then we are by definition missing a trick. You don't have to have an answer tomorrow. We need to be asking the questions though, right? Who's responsible in the management team for asking these provocative questions, looking at the entirely new sort of sectors of competition? Every sector has disruptors coming in. I don't like the term, but there you go. Every sector has massive venture capital investment coming in, and it's just moving faster and faster. And then of course there's subdomains, there's a complexity to it, but if we don't start instrumenting it explicitly and then having those regular conversations, again, the risk is that we miss it.
I think that's a really excellent takeaway, what you said a moment ago about taking the technology conversation into economic and financial terms. I love that as a takeaway because so many conversations, with my technology background, I'm often currently still the tech person on the board, right? And that's going to change over time. We know that. But currently that is the state for a lot of companies. And therefore the conversations about technology end up being more abstract. They end up just kind of being, oh, let's talk about the tech, instead of let's talk about the so what from the tech. How do we make money today? How is that way of making money potentially going to grow or shrink based on technology changes, and then start to predicate your business strategy around that fact, not just the technology itself. It is just a tool at the end of the day, after all. That's an excellent takeaway.